Ministries. Good to see you tonight. We're going to go ahead and jump right into our second week's lesson on the new series we started last week called The Warrior Within. I hope you got something from last week's lesson. Let's review a little bit what last week we talked about. When we were formed in the womb, Jesus formed us with specific talents. He formed us with specific abilities. He has designed each of us for a purpose. And if you feel like you don't have purpose tonight, I promise you have purpose through Jesus Christ. There is a role in His kingdom for each and every one of us. And when we learn to embrace that role, we become an unstoppable force for His glory. So in this series about Gideon, we're learning to embrace the warrior within, to embrace that purpose and unlock the warrior within us through Jesus Christ. And so last week we dove in, is that a word? We jumped right, there we go. Well, we jumped right into the story of Gideon and how the people of Israel were being oppressed by the Midianites, and the story began with Gideon in this winepress, threshing his grain, hiding so that his food would not be taken. And in this low point in Gideon's life, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and spoke some things into his life, saying that he was going to be used to pull the Israelites out of the hands of the Midianites and to give them victory through Gideon. And Gideon doubted this plan, this purpose that God began to place on his life, and so he doubted that, and he said things like, I come from a family that's the weakest. I'm from the half tribe of Manasseh. I'm not very fit for this. But we learned last week that God does not call those that are qualified. God has not really got a big history of pulling out people that appear to be the best fit for a job, but rather He picks people out that He qualifies to the job. And so God is doing that with us today. You may not feel like you're capable of doing what God is calling you to do, but when God calls you and it's from Him, trust me, He will be with you. He will be with you. The other thing that we learned last week was that after the angel of the Lord came to Gideon and spoke these things to him, that he was challenged to tear down the altar of Baal that his father had built. And he was afraid to do this. That was going to be kind of a big thing. He actually took quite a few guys with him under the cover of night to destroy this altar to Baal. And one thing I didn't point out super clearly last week was that when he tore down that altar to Baal, he was supposed to erect an altar to God. And so that was the challenge. And so in our own lives, what we've got to learn to do is to tear down those idols in our lives that may hinder us from fulfilling the purpose that God has placed in our lives. And those can look different for every single person. What might be a hindrance to you, what might take God's position in your life may be different than what I have to learn to take control over in my own life. But we all have those things that desire the center stage in our life, that desire to take the place of God. But we must tear those down in our lives and build an altar to our God, and devote our lives to Him. We have purpose in Him. And so that brings us to this week's lesson with Gideon. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn our Bible to Judges chapter 36 and verse 40. And I'm going to pull that up here. Judges chapter 36 and verse 40. And we'll put it up on the screen too so you can see it. And it says this: Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. So while the angel of the Lord had come to Gideon, previously and told him, there's a job that you must do. You're going to be used to deliver your people from the hand of the Midianites. Even though he received that word from the angel of the Lord, there was still doubt in Gideon's heart. And so he begins to fleece the Lord, is what we call it. And he literally placed a wool fleece on the threshing floor. And he says, okay, God, if this is really from you, if this is really what you're going to do through me, if this is really what you want from me, then here's what I'm asking you to do to help my doubt. He says, I want you to, I'm going to place this fleece on the ground. And when the dew falls, the ground around it should be dry, but the fleece should be the only thing that is wet. And so the next day, he got that fleece and he wrung out a bowl full of water. The ground was dry, the fleece was wet. But see, still Gideon had some doubt. So if we read in verse 39 here, it says, Then Gideon said to God, Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. But this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with the dew. So it was the opposite this time. God, I want all the ground around it to be wet this time. And this time, the wool fleece needs to be dry and needs to be covered with dew. And so in verse 40 it says, That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with the dew. So, just like Gideon, we may feel like we're still incapable of doing what God calls us to do. And even when, we're like, well, I think I've heard from you, we may still have doubts in our lives. But it was through these fleeces that Gideon began to understand and believe in his purpose. His faith was beginning to take form. See, he lacked faith. That's why he doubted. But it wouldn't be long before his faith was tested again. So let's read in Judges chapter 7, verses 2 through 8. Because, his faith was already being tested in what God was asking him to do. He didn't believe that it was possible, but God was getting ready to shake him up just a little bit more. So let's read Judges chapter 7, verses 2 through 8. Then the Lord said to Gideon, You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. Whoa, 22,000 men left the group, and 10,000 remained. But the Lord said to Gideon, There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, This one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, This one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from the cup tans, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets of the others. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. So Gideon found 32,000 men who believed in him, and they believed in his cause, and they gathered together and prepared to take on the armies of the Midianites. And so as they begin to prepare, as the Bible tells us, God told Gideon that his army was too big. And this was strange because they were still horribly outnumbered. God told Gideon to inform the people that those who were scared, that they could go home. And 22,000 people left, and only 10,000 remained. Now, with an army that was less than two-thirds its original size, Gideon prepared again. However, word came again, there are still too many people, that God said. And so as Gideon took the people for water, God informed him that those who knelt to drink water were dismissed from the army. Now only 300 people remained. Gideon started with 32,000 people. Now his army was less than a hundredth of that size. Talking about being worried about what God was planning for you. I mean, 32,000 people, from my understanding, was already a small army in comparison to the Midianite army. But to whittle it down to 300 people, I think I would begin to question, God, what have you got in mind? What are you doing here? Why is this happening? How am I going to be victorious like this? But the Bible tells us that God whittled down the army so that Gideon's faith would not be in man. I'm kind of taking some liberties there. That the people's faith would not be in man, but rather that their faith would rely upon God. And you see, in our own lives, when we start to pursue purpose through Jesus Christ and God begins to place some little things within our hearts, it's going to be very, very easy for us to become reliant upon ourselves. You see, it's not faith in ourselves that gives us power, but it's our faith in Jesus Christ that gives us the ability to accomplish his purpose and his plan for us. And so we see Gideon's faith being shaken here. Let's move on. Let's read Judges 7, 9 through 15. And it says this: During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying." So God's speaking to Gideon, and he's saying, if you're afraid, if you're still afraid, Gideon, go down to the camp with your servant and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley thick as locusts. There were a lot of them. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. Listen up here. "I had a dream," he was saying. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." You see, we only find victory in our lives through faith in Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, the Bible says our salvation is found through faith in Jesus Christ. Faith is a powerful thing. As I've mentioned, it gives us power to move those mountains that otherwise seem unmovable, mountains that are too difficult to trek up. But through faith, we can say to the mountain, "Move," and it can move. That's big. And so our purpose in life should not be based upon our own abilities. We should not get too comfortable with saying, "I've got it all together and I can handle this," because really our purpose and our victory will only be found through faith in Jesus Christ today. Just like Gideon had to learn to have faith in God to deliver his people from the hand of the Midianites, we've got to have faith in God as we pursue the purpose that he places in our heart. God bless you today. Hope you got something from this Bible study. Take it with you. Take a few moments maybe tonight and pray and ask God to increase your faith in this time of trouble. And ask God to give you faith in him when our vision may be blurred by everything that's around us or what we see as flaws and things that we're not capable of doing on our own. Let's look through the lens of faith and realize that we are able to move those mountains through Christ today. God bless you.
Hey, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you want current information on the situation that our nation is currently faced with, follow us on Facebook. And if you want more content like this, go to our YouTube channel. Have a great day.